You're welcome to be on at the same time, and then you can defend yourself.
Yeah, the perils of having a co-host, I think they call that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and he's I wouldn't defend myself. He's mostly right. I oftentimes throw, we were talking about this week, like some of the sound effects that I throw at him, because he's just sourcing that from wherever he can find it. And on the episode that drops this Wednesday, I was like, well, I'm going to need an old-time piano playing Camptown Ladies.
Oh my
I'm
God.
going to need a snake charmer and an elephant. And he's like, at the end of the episode, there's a solid minute where he just tacked on him complaining about all the sound effects. And I think it's great. I'm totally into it.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Right. I think that there's a certain element of like him, you know, it's a behind the scenes look, the sound guy getting really angry about this stuff. And anyway.
Yep.
All right, so we are live on actually Twitch and YouTube and Mixer and one more, Facebook. Yeah, there's Streamlabs OBS is great because it keeps on adding these new functionality things that make it so much easier than it used to be. I used to do this, but I had to use like a separate program. Now there's a thing called Mob Crush on
What's the
it.
Twitch URL?
/Robots Radio.
Okay. Right.
And how about for Facebook? Because I want to share that shit.
Yeah, I think it's just the Robots Radio Facebook page, which I don't remember the URL off the top of my head because I never go to Facebook. Let me go find out.
Oh, I'm on it right now.
Yeah, does it have a... Yeah, it's with zeros. R0B0TS Radio.
Okay.
Run, internet, flee. There we go.
And it should be somewhere. I mean, my view is different because I'm logged in, but somewhere on there's a video playing.
Cool.
Figure it out.
Hey, I haven't. I need to check out the Myth one with us. Who's running that?
That's mine. So that was a and I was going to bring this up a little bit on the show today because I want to talk about some of the shows I'm doing and some actually another one I want to start, but I want to justify it in the fact that I'm only really doing a few of them. I'm not doing all of them full time. And Myth was like, I wanted to take a stab at like the podcast lore and this idea of recounting stories from mythology, folklore, but mostly mythology, and doing it in a way where it's got a little bit of a storytelling vibe. It's got some really nice background music through significant portions of the episode, you know, like that kind of thing, really, really polished. I really want to take kind of what I was doing with the other shows and move it up a notch, but I'm finding that takes a lot more work. And, so until I can devote more time, you know, maybe, I don't know, one of these days I'll be able to shift to doing more of this stuff and less of my regular job stuff. And then that'll be back on the radar. So I put a little notice up there saying like, hey, this is on hiatus for now, but please stay tuned because eventually there will be more stuff. So
have you listened to the other, like, the three that I listened to that are in that vein, two by Parcast, and then I can't remember, I think it's like Myths and Legends by an independent guy. There's a bunch of really good ones that you might, I don't know if you want to draw inspiration from or what have you.
Yeah, I've done some research on that. I even reached out to, is it the Myth and it's been a few weeks now, the Myth and Legends guy or one of them who actually gave my show a call out on his show, which was really nice.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's... Oh man, I just dropped a peanut butter cracker. Oh no. All right, I'm back. Hey, White Guar. Welcome, dude. We got White Guar in chat with us.
Right.
If you guys jump in the Twitch channel, you'll see at least the Twitch chatters.
Cool.
And if you hadn't gathered, we're just as disorganized / laid back as the Selectors. That's kind of a given.
Yeah, we haven't actually officially started the show yet. We're just kind of pre-show chatting. So what was I saying? That's man, that's something I really think everybody in the network should devote even just an hour or two. Hey Mustang, welcome. Is reaching out to other shows, like similar shows, and guesting and getting the cross guests, because I'm almost at like 100% response rate of just reaching out to other people and just saying, hey, I really like your show. can we guest on each other's show? Or, would you, I'd love to give a call out on your show if you want to call out my show. Yeah. Most people are all for it all the time. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I've got 3 spots I'm running this week. One was a prearranged with The Veil that I'm pseudo gentleman's contract obligated to do and excited to be working with them. And then I've got another one, a guy who's from Baltimore reached out to me. What's it called? How I Died, and that one's really good. So we're going to be trading spots for each other on the air, they were both narrative stories, and we're both going to be sort of pushing it into the protagonist's hands. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to be running a Fresh Tomatoes spot at the end. So I'm all about it. The more that we grow both within the network and without, I think it's going to help us all a lot.
Oh yeah, totally. And Aramithius, if you ever get the Selectives guys to do an audio version of the show, I'd love to offer them a spot on the network, and we can help promote them too, because
I will.
I mean,
I'll have a chat with Deadeye at some point, but we'll see.
Okay. What is that?
So it's another Elder Scrolls lore show that's primarily been on YouTube, and Aramithius is part of it. And they go, I mean, my show's mostly for beginners. Aramithius' show is deep dived into very specific topics, and they're a little bit more in that vein of people who have been studying this stuff for years, talking about, all sorts of deep concepts.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, if you kind of think that my shows are heavily scripted, here's where all the references come from and how the concept works in a very, very structured way. This is a podcast full of people who can do that off the top of their head. So just getting together and talking Elder Scrolls lore. But yeah. But anyway, should we probably actually start officially?
Yeah. When we start officially.
Seems like a plan.
Yeah.
I'm much on some crack. Let me take a drink and clear my throat.
Yep. Cool.
All right, you guys know how this is. Each week, each person brings some sort of topic to discuss. Would either of you like to go first?
I cede the floor.
Cool. Yeah, I was gonna do something about. Basically, I've noticed the types of games that I seem to be playing at the moment, based on what I reinstalled when I rebuilt my computer on Steam. And they're kind of interesting in that I want to say, well, is there any of these actually being built anymore? But anyway.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and how people actually experience and use their games. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know. As well as possibly some stuff about Bloodlines 2, although the hype around the trailers has died down a bit.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. We'll get it started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Robots Roundtable. I am your host, Robots, or Tom. You can call me either. And I'm excited to bring 2 guests with me from the Robots Radio Network today. First, we have Aramithius from Written in Uncertainty. Aramithius, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Robots. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a trial getting everything sorted out with connectivity and moving house, but I finally made it.
Yeah, you've had quite the, last month and a half, it seems. It's been a while.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's good to have you back putting regular shows out. I just listened to your episode about Vivek, and awesome stuff as usual. And you get to guest on this show, which I think this is the first time you've been on here.
Yes. So I have no idea about the format. It's all going to go terribly wrong.
Awesome.
Oh, we had so much fun last time. I was brand new and it went great. I think we're going to have a blast.
Awesome.
Yeah. And that other voice you hear is Ian from Under the Shroud. Welcome, Ian.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is great. I'm very excited to have another chat.
Awesome. Yeah, last week was a lot of fun. This show is interesting because every week, each of the hosts who shows up, and all of the hosts on the network are welcome. And every week we've got kind of a different mix, and we all bring something to talk about. And sometimes it's lighthearted and funny and silly, and sometimes we get into really deep human ethics and morality discussion. So you never know what you're going to get. And this week, Aramithius will be starting us off with whatever you brought to the table. So what do you have for us?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about how you guys think about narrative and games and basically a whole plethora of stuff. I've recently built a computer again, basically. And I've realized the games that I'm reinstalling on Steam there's not an awful lot that's the same in the way of topics. I mean, I've got the Elder Scrolls, I've got Dragon Age, I've got Mountain Blade Warband, I've got Battlefleet Gothic Armada, Stellaris, Prison Architect, Dwarf Fortress. They're all kind of, the genres are a bit everywhere. I mean, sci-fi and fantasy generally, but they're all kind of ones where you have emergent narratives driving everything. You've got the Elder Scrolls, where you have a hero who's kind of set loose in a world to do whatever they will. Mountain Blade Warband is even more that. You can ride around into the wide blue yonder, leading armies around wherever you will. And Dwarf Fortress, which is just 7 dwarfs try and build a fortress, and chaos happens. And it will eventually
ASCII characters.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to see whether this thing that I've built, that's in theory very quick, will actually run it at a decent rate of knots. But we'll see. But all of them are kind of things that where you build your own narrative, and the narrative kind of emerges from the gameplay rather than being presented to you, like say something like The Last of Us, which has a very, very definite narrative playthrough and structure for things in how the story plays out. And I'm just realizing that I haven't really bought much in the way of games for a while outside of the Elder Scrolls. So I'm just curious about whether those sorts of games are out there, and how you guys think about narrative as a whole, and how you approach entertainment. Because just from my perspective with the Elder Scrolls, I almost now can't pick it up unless I have a narrative arc for a character. Like before I play Skyrim, I was like, right, I'm going to play a Breton necromancer who's going to do this, that, and the other, who's going to aim for this set of birth signs, and is going to play through this set of quests.
Right. So you're building your own story. You're mapping out. You're role playing your character to the extreme, right?
Yeah, to a degree.
Yeah.
But I just realized that all of my games are kind of around that sort of a thing. I mean, even for something like Blood Bowl, where you play in a league, and it's just you play through a season. It's the same sort of thing. It's your team's ups and downs. One of them might die one week. One of them might break their back in another. But that's entirely dependent on the gameplay.
Right, and it creates a story.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have this emergent story that comes out from your choices, and the randomality of the world that you're in.
That's a tricky one.
Words are tough, guys.
Words are tough.
Oh man.
No, emergent words. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen much in the way of hype around those sorts of games. I mean, there's Fallout 76 is probably the closest I've seen to that sort of game that's been tried, and that's kind of not been the most well received. But
yeah,
I don't know whether what you think about game design and how that's been recently in terms of those sorts of games.
Yeah, so really what you're saying is what is happening in the game space right now for people who approach games the way you are with those games. This emergent, create your own story kind of world, rather than the world is telling you a story and you're just a passive viewer basically of the story, right? It's more of an act of creating your own world and being part of it than a passive. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's the difference between games as an expansion on movies and storytelling, where you are just making some of the choices and moving through the story and playing with the mechanics, versus something that's much more has its origin in something like Dungeons and Dragons, where you are an active participant in the creation of your own story. You create your own character. You are actively participating in the events that happen in the world. Your actions should have an effect on what the dungeon master decides to do next, or how the story will emerge. So I think those are coming from two very different directions.
Which is kind of making me wonder what's going to happen with Bloodlines 2. Actually, I caught the hype around the trailers for that a while back, but I run the tabletop role playing game that's based off as well.
For Ian. Ian, are you familiar with much in the way of tabletop role playing games? And when he says Bloodlines, what that is? Probably not, right?
I'm not familiar with Bloodlines. I was once very familiar with tabletop role-playing games.
So this might be right up your avenue. So Bloodlines is Vampire the Masquerade. And
really?
Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember Masquerade very well. That was oddly enough, Masquerade was the best sort of table I ever played at, which was really fun. It was also a weird one because everybody else who was playing was, between I want to say like 25 and 40, and they were largely pals who'd met around a gaming shop, and they were all, having some drinks, and every now and then somebody'd slip out and smoke a joint. And I was 16 years old. And they knew me because they'd seen me working at the Renaissance Festival, and I was like, in this weird sort of way, like the young partway celebrity, partway apprentice, because I actually lived in a fantasy world to a certain extent. I also was a child.
You were the sidekick.
Yeah. And the one guy whose house we played at in particular, had this thing where he was like taking me under his wing to show me how the world works. And I'm like, I mean, it's cool and all, but as far as I can tell, like, this is not as interesting as what it was. A lot of fun. I had a blast, but it wasn't quite as interesting as actually watching a lance go at a guy at, 40, 50 miles an hour. Yeah. But yeah, no, I remember Masquerade very well. And actually White Wolf in particular was a huge influence on creating the Shroud universe.
Oh wow! In what way? I mean, I've not delved into the Shroud too much, as I've said before the show, but it kind of feels like a bit like the way they went with the New World of Darkness side of things.
Yes. In terms of world construction, it's much more similar to the New World of Darkness stuff. I personally prefer the old, antiquated White Wolf system, but it just was better. But in terms of its sort of mass inclusion, yeah. I mean, urban fantasy as a genre has gone through some interesting revolutions. A lot of people, myself as well, give a lot of the credit to Jim Butcher and his Dresden Files series for shaping what urban fantasy has largely come to be. But if you look at where it actually really sprung up, it really was White Wolf.
Yeah.
And this idea of, monsters right here. I don't remember if I talked about this last week, but there's a trichotomy. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Between the different approaches to what makes urban fantasy function, this idea like there are monsters right here with us. And the way I tend to think of it are, and Tom, stop me if I did talk about this last week, but the way I tend to think of it is conspiracy, gas leaks, or out of the closet. Conspiracy being there's some organized government force or corporate force, religious force, or whatever that keeps all the monsters out of the public eye. Then gas leaks, which is the idea that people don't see it. So your average normal everyday person sees a vampire attack somebody and they just see a couple making out, or the best example being the dragon comes through and blows up town square and everybody's like, oh, it was a gas leak.
Right.
And then of course out of the closet, which Bright took on the idea that they're elves and wizards and whatnot are walking the streets and everybody knows they're there. Anyway, this is a long roundabout way to say that the way that White Wolf framed that had a huge impact on me, particularly because it had this it had this horror setting, but in fact, a lot of the way that the adventures and stories were sort of framed was in a noir setting, like you're trying to solve a thing, and nobody's a particularly good person. The heroes or the other players were largely encouraged to be selfish and lean into aspects of Dungeons and Dragons that have been happening forever, where everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm going to loot the corpse of the innkeeper for, his vest.
Yeah. The murder hobo squad. Right.
Yeah. And White Wolf really ran with that. They're like, oh yeah, totally. Let's let people be as horrible as they want to be. And that's a lot of what the Shroud universe is.
Okay. Cool.
I have a question from a while back. Aramithius, you mentioned a game with dwarves that had 7 dwarves. I'm never going to do the proper research. The only way I'm ever going to find out if that's a what the hell is her name? Snow White reference. Is that is it? Or is it
as
just...
far as I know, that's the only Snow White reference in the game, if it is there. But if you're going to choose a number of dwarves to start with, 7's a good number.
7's pretty good.
But that's fantastic. I kind of like it more that way. Like the idea that, like, okay, we're doing a dwarf thing. Let's do a little nod to the way that everybody knows dwarves best, and then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. But but no, Bloodlines was basically, just to recap for you, it was a contested city. You had the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and the Anarchs all in there in factional wars and whatever. Your character was sired by someone. It was I can't remember. I think they killed your sire.
Something like that
in the prelude. Yeah, it was done without permission. The prince decided in his magnanimity to let the child live, and it kind of gets taken on from there. But
now this was a game. So some more background. This was a game that came out 2004.
Yeah,
something like that.
I seem to remember when that happened.
Yeah,
and it being. There being some complaint about the antiquity of it, but at the same time, like, it's a vampire game. Like, it's better than that shitty TV show they made.
It was. It had a lot.
The Embrace.
Yes, and it had a lot of. They were really reaching far for like player agency, the ability to make whatever choices you want, the ability to be whatever character you wanted, and those kinds of things. And the game seemed a little unpolished when it came out, so a lot of the fan base had to go back and fix some of the bugs and actually wrap up the ending of the game, if I recall.
Yeah, they were trying desperately to meet their deadlines, and they kept their deadlines rather than push everything back. So the ending is really rushed. But my kind of complaint was it particularly given my preceding ramble, was that it still felt quite linear as far as I was concerned. You could quite happily be a Malkavian busily playing with everyone's minds to achieve someone, or you could be a Bruyar who comes in and clubs everyone to death with a baseball bat while going at 500 miles an hour. You could still do all that, but the approaches didn't feel quite nuanced because the story didn't change. And I'm just, that and the way they presented the Sabbats just bugged me immensely. They basically presented them as kind of disposable mooks without any that weren't presented as human at any point.
Well, I mean, that makes a certain amount of sense. I would think. I mean, I have no idea how far games have gone, and this conversation has been pretty enlightening about the amount of customizability and to your character's motivations, blah, 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 blah. But it would seem that because they did such a good job in the development of all the different subsects with these different, I can't remember the term, the genealogy of the vampires.
Yeah.
It would be pretty tricky to meld your missions to any specific variety, because they were just really diversely done. Yeah.
No, it's tricky to get everything in there and do it justice. I can see that, but they kind of did. Was the thing.
Right.
They kind of they had it in the middle of a sect war, and so then you kind of had to bring the Sabbat in. I think the Anarchs came in there to some degree. You had a Kaija and a Cathayan right somewhere further near the end, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it kind of carried on. So I'm excited for Bloodlines 2, but a little worried as to what they're going to do with it, particularly as they've re-released the 5th edition of the tabletop game recently, and they've already had their controversies about that.
So I've got a quick question about this, and if nobody knows, we move on. But I'm just curious, how large are those writing rooms? Because in my head, that sounds like easy 25 folks who are working day and night for a while to make sure that it sort of meets all these different standards. Particularly if you've got, how many were there again? Like 12, 13?
13 clans, yeah.
Yeah, these
13
games
clans?
these games take years. Like, it's not uncommon for an open world game where you can create your own characters and you have multiple types of lines of potential options to take 5, 6, 7 years to make. So
absolutely.
I mean, these, like, whether it's 25 people working, around the clock, or it's a smaller team that's just worked over a very long period of time. Yeah, it is quite the undertaking.
I mean, I would assume that, obviously the time frame being what it is, and the fact that, in that time frame, what you might have originally thought you were capable of doing technologically is going to change, guaranteed, after you get started, in probably ways you can't guess at. I would assume that you'd want to have a fairly diverse writer's room. Like, you would want to be very careful in who you're picking to make sure that you've got a lot of very different voices at the table. I've never been in a writer's room. It is one of my great fantasies to either start or be present in a writer's room. But that variety in particular, because, I mean, when you're writing a television show or a movie or Saturday Night Live or whatever, there's still the sense of like, okay, we're all telling the same story. But in that room, there's a significant drive and advantage to not telling the same story, to having to keep a lot of different balls all up in the air at once, and managing how they all hit the ground. It just sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very tricky. And plus you have the mainline stories and the variations on the mainline stories, but then you have side stories. Yeah. You have individuals who are just writing one-off side quests that are just these little side stories. And some of those in these games are some of my favorites. Whether it's Elder Scrolls or whatever, sometimes you just run into some quirky little side thing and you're like, holy crap, this is amazing.
Yeah, they can be pulled generally from anywhere, from what I know of how those are written. You can get other areas of the production team involved with those, because if they don't need to connect to anything, they don't need to be as cohesive as everything else. So you can just bring in people to do odd jobs here and there, which is a really neat way of doing it. I kind of wish I could do that for the tabletop games I run, to be fair, but
yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be a nice way to have a break. I mean, there are some systems that do it. I think Ars Magica explicitly has a kind of a built-in thing of, well, that you cycle through characters and there's a different games master that takes over different parts of the story. So there are some out there that'll do it.
Yeah.
They're nowhere near the majority, but I need to actually try and find some of them one of these days. Yeah, when I have the spare time between everything else that's going on.
Right.
So we're podcasters. We always have time.
We've got plenty of extra time.
Rubbish.
So
yeah.
let's bring this back around to your original question, because I don't know that we actually answered it.
I'm not sure we did.
But the question was, what other games are coming out that create this world where you're able to, I don't know, let's say co-create in the game, in your story, in your character story, all that kind of stuff. Bloodlines, I'm hoping that's one of them. I was going to bring up Cyberpunk 2077 because that's coming out in April, and that's another, so much of what we talk about, at least among the hosts on this network, all relate to a lot of the same kind of core things. Tabletop games that became other properties, or storytelling that comes from urban fantasy or cyberpunk, or, like all these different kinds of, I don't know how to wrap that all into a little pretty bow, but Cyberpunk was a tabletop system, Cyberpunk 2013 and then 2020, and now Cyberpunk Red, and the people who make the Witcher games, which is going to be a Netflix show, CD Projekt Red, are coming out with Cyberpunk 2077. And same kind of thing, where you can be a net runner, or you can be a rocker boy, or you can be a nomad, or all these different character classes with different stories and backgrounds. And I have a feeling that game is going to have its mainline story stuff, but similar to The Witcher 3, is going to have a lot of room for you to just make decisions and interact with different people in the world and tell your own story. So that's one that comes to mind.
What was the White Wolf Cyberpunk tabletop? played it not that long ago, and I'm cannot remember. Because when I saw that Cyberpunk game coming out, and it was one of very few, again, I'm not much of a video gamer, but I watched that trailer and thought, shit, this looks exactly like that other game I used to play.
The World of Darkness one that they did was Mage. They did Mage as a potential Cyberpunk one. I read through Mage and just thought this could actually be the Matrix.
Right.
But no, there is another one. There
was a future one.
The something project.
I'm thinking something else. Maybe I'm thinking I'm not thinking of Starjammer or Spelljammer, which I definitely played and was a friggin' trip.
Or are you thinking Shadowrun?
I am thinking Shadowrun. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's not White Wolf.
Who is that? Was that Wizards of the Coast?
It wouldn't surprise me. They own everything else.
Somebody right now is yelling at their car radio. It's like, you idiots! It's this.
But yeah, it is something like the Dresden Project or something that's a narrative story within a cyberpunk universe. It was one of the few White Wolf ones that actually had a full narrative arc. They released 7 books of it.
Wow!
And it was just a set story that you played through. But I can't remember what it's actually called. I could be hideously wrong. But oh well.
Wow, man, this is really rabbit trailed in all sorts of really cool directions. Awesome. So, did we answer your question, Eremithius?
I think.
Are there other?
So. Yeah,
what about like the Outer Worlds? That's another game that's coming out very soon, and it's by some of the original makers of the Fallout games. It's created by Obsidian.
Yeah.
Who did the original Vampire Bloodlines? I feel like Obsidian was involved in that.
Yeah, I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised if it was Obsidian.
Yeah, because that's right in their wheelhouse. That's the part of their pedigree. So there's Outer Worlds, which is supposed to be more linear than a regular Fallout game, but you are very much able to pick and choose how you handle situations. So kind of similar to what you're talking about. Yeah, I feel like those games are further between, but also create more opportunity to just keep going back to the well.
Yeah, which I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in the current games market, to be fair, because then you get into, well, what is it really worth them to release it, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Because once you've bought your game, well, how do they get the money out of you if you're going to be playing this thing for absolutely ages?
Yeah, 300 hours, and you only paid $60 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So then you've got things like the in-app purchases, are they coercive, etc., and all the stuff that Jim Sterling rants about so marvelously. So I can kind of see where they're going with that. I really like the way that Paradox does that as a business model, to be fair, because they don't do in-app purchases, but they do substantive DLCs that come out every few months.
Yeah.
On the back of a base game, and I think they're still releasing them for Crusader Kings 2 and that sort of thing, which
oh my gosh,
like 2014 or something, and they're still pumping out expansions for it. I found the game that I was thinking of actually now while I was typing quietly. The game that I was thinking of that was kind of the short run thing was Orpheus, but I don't know whether that means anything to anyone here, so I'm just going to say that and move on.
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, but yeah, that's those kind of the need to keep games going longer and make them viable for longer is something that people kind of need to get a bit used to, unless you want to start only renting games, which is even worse. But
yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
But
that's still a thing?
Well, it's so this is a whole nother can of things, because you have a number of different major corporations who are trying to move us into this age of like the Netflix of video games, and this idea that you would pay a subscription fee to be able to play from their library the games, but then you don't actually own them. Plus, you would need a network connection to do so. There's a whole lot of ways that people are trying to change the market around to kind of gate and create their own little walled gardens and control their user bases and all that kind of stuff. So rather than just, hey, buy a game, play it as much as you want.
Yeah. Although from that perspective, the Netflix comparison, it's kind of interesting how computer games are kind of going straight for what TV is doing now. Because when you think when Netflix started offering its streaming service and that sort of thing, it was pretty much the only game in town. So it was a fairly open house in terms of what kind of content it offered and what it promoted and that sort of thing. Whereas at the moment now it's moving towards pushing its own Netflix produced stuff, and Disney has pulled out and is producing its own thing. So you're now getting to the point where you almost need a subscription service to each individual TV network or content producing thing. Whereas I think from what I can see of the way that computer games are doing it, they are going straight for that model. You're going straight for Blizzard offering that you can only play Blizzard games through these sorts of things. You've got what's Google's one? The name of that? That's kind of the outlier in terms of this. In terms of it's the only independent one really. But it's Google, so they've kind of got the pull to do it. But how long that will last if the publishers aren't going to be seeing enough revenue from it is kind of an open question, really.
Yeah, that's a big open. Who knows what's going to happen with all that? They talk about that a lot on the DL on the news show on the network. And Stadia, that was it. Google Stadia, and they have a few episodes ago. The resounding response to that was F Google Stadia over and over again, and that became the focus of that episode. So yeah, they have some very strong feelings.
Right, I will definitely check that out and have a chat with them about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to Ian and Under the Shroud. And what are you bringing this week?
I was thinking I wanted to talk about foreshadowing because it's a lot of what I'm dealing with right now. Excuse me, in my own in my writing process.
Okay.
Excuse me. It's not a direct. I apologize for my slight cold. It's not a direct question. I wouldn't say it was just a topic that I've had on my mind. Feeling out what other people's thoughts are about foreshadowing. I'm certainly curious what you guys' thoughts are on the topic with video games and how they do that well. Basically, the only game I've ever played was Baldur's Gate, which I've played 3 or 4 times. And I remember that being a major issue there. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it in the construction of a world, particularly in the framed as the sort of what's the term, planners versus pantsers in writing. And just so that was what I was thinking up. I'll let you guys take it for a second while I frame my thoughts a little better.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic because foreshadowing, storytelling happens in so many different ways, whether you're doing an audio drama kind of show like you do, or you're running a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Sometimes you want to place things in the story that you know you're going to be able to come back to later and refer back to, or you're writing for a video game or, a traditional novel. Yeah, that's interesting. Aramithius, do you have any thoughts about foreshadowing?
I am in 2 minds about it because I generally, when it's done in terms of film, I find it really boring. To be honest, because my wife hates watching films with me when I'm allowed to talk. Because I'll say, so this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this, that, and the other.
Sometimes it feels too on the nose, and you're like, now we know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, but that feels like most of it to me. It's kind of interesting when I can find a show or a film that doesn't live up to those expectations. That's kind of what it's it's kind of what I'm hunting for. It's like, oh, that's an interesting way of doing things. Or
the best foreshadowing are the things that you don't realize until after the fact when you rewatch or look back.
And that was what I was going to say, is that like there's there needs to be a subtle hand. Arguably, foreshadowing is just sort of it's a term for the more background plot building of any story, because I mean it's just the building blocks towards what's going to happen down the line. So for instance, right now I'm dealing with a plot line we're going to be introducing. I introduced a couple episodes ago the idea of were-rats, these half-man, half-right lycanthropy creatures that are largely hated in this world, but there's not really a particular reason why.
Maybe because they're just rats. Nobody really likes rats.
It's because they're just rats, but also there's this. What I liked was this idea of setting them up as, just sort of being loathed for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the rat element, and I don't think I referenced this directly. There's this sense that, yeah, that sucks too, but it's more that they're just gross. And today I was trying to set up, they're going to be much more sympathetic in about 6 months from now. And just dealing with how to lace in that sympathy, which is not necessarily like foreshadowing. I think it's associated a lot with plot, where, there's a series of great examples of this in the movie Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I believe I referenced last week as well, where the narrator comes out and says, oh, that was stupid. We put that conversation in here because now we know down the line that he's going to die or what have you. And that is, Shane Black does it nicely in that movie, but by just calling himself out on showing his cards. But if you're doing it well, it should be an emotional moment that is acknowledged that will then come in down the line. There's a conversation I had with a buddy, and I can't remember what anime he was referencing, but not anime, manga. He was referencing a manga and how he would, it's been going on forever because manga artists and writers are absolutely astounding a lot of times in their productivity and the longevity of their plot lines and projects. And he was telling me that this one it had to do with Pirate Kings or something, how there would be background characters that would be drawn in, and then they would come up months, if not years, if not a decade later. And how it was so obvious that he had planned ahead from the get-go. And I've never read this particular story, so I have no idea if he's right or not. And if it was a conscious choice that, let's just say, Blackbeard was in the background of a frame and he knew exactly where Blackbeard was going to end up. That's entirely possible. What I would posit, and what I've had a lot of fun with in writing my own stuff, is that you don't necessarily know. When you're creating a character, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And that's where it breaks down from foreshadowing and becomes more about learning and developing and making connections. I'm trying to think of a good example. Oh, so I recently wrote in an episode that has a Dr. Frankenstein take on things.
Frankenstein and Igor,
who I love the way that we managed to pull them off. And the actor who played them was phenomenal. But after I recorded with him, I started to see like, oh, okay, so that's sort of who this guy is, and now I can use him in a different light. I wasn't foreshadowing elements of who he was. I was just cracking easy jokes. But then down the line, I saw where like, oh, okay, so that joke that I made there can be this plot element there.
So you're pantsing it.
Pantsing it, yeah. But then the sort of the blend happens when I know that as I get to the next episode, I was working on the next episode with the Doctor today, and I know what jokes I'm going to take advantage of for plot. But then as I'm writing that in and doing new jokes that might end up being plot later, I'm also planning for like 3 or 4 potential possibilities down the line.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily know what you're foreshadowing. You just need to take advantage of what you've laced in.
Yeah, it's a matter of kind of just sowing some seeds and saying, well, this something might come of this, something might not, and kind of taking it from there. I know that there's there's one example I can pick from that from the Elder Scrolls. Actually, there's the book On Oblivion was published in Daggerfall, which was, I think, about 96 or so.
Yeah, 96, 97, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the only mention before Oblivion, released in 2005, of the Daedric Prince Jiggalag. And they just threw a random name in there. They thought, oh, let's make something of that someday.
Right. And then nothing happened for a long time.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they build a whole DLC out of it. But because they literally just mentioned the name, they could build everything whole cloth. If you're vague enough about it, like just putting a character in the background of a frame, you can give a vague context of a thing. But if you're vague enough, you can say, that actually works. Because it clicks in with what you've already absorbed as part of your passive experience for that thing. And so it makes sense, but it's not anything specific until it is.
Right.
Now,
right.
You know who I think does really good foreshadowing?
Who's that?
So George R.R. Martin, and of course everybody talks about Game of Thrones and the shows and the books and things. And I've listened to all the books on audio, and when he does foreshadowing, and I might be wrong about this, but almost 100% of the time it's through analogy. So you have this happens a lot with the animals that represent the different houses. Mm-hmm. And you will have events with like wolves or birds or fish or whatever. And somebody will have a vision of something, or something will actually happen in the world, or somebody will tell a story about something that previously happened. And those things end up foreshadowing future events in the books. And because it's all analogy, it kind of connects back to what you guys are saying. It could be something that foreshadows something, but it may just be something that happened. You don't have to tie up all those ends. Mm-hmm. And by not tying up all the ends, you're now keeping everyone kind of on the edge of their seat, because they don't know for sure that, like, once you catch on to this idea of like, well, the author keeps on doing these types of foreshadows, I know what to look for in the future, then it's still vague enough that it could go multiple ways, and it may not turn into anything at all. And that means that you can't predict what's going to happen. Yeah,
it's its own sort of variety of red herring. When you make prophecy part of the deal, in whatever regard, you can really manipulate that. And prophecy, I'm sure, is a big thing in Elder Scrolls and some other video games. Is one of the most misused tools in fiction, because frequently it's used. I have no idea how it's used in the various games you guys have been discussing, but frequently it's used in this sort of like, okay, the hero just basically has to show up and they're gonna kill the bad thing. It's just this horrible trope that gets overused. Whereas if you use it just right, it's either of the traditional Greek, what were they called? The Greek prophetesses.
The oracles.
Oracles, yeah.
The oracles, right.
Oracle at Delphi, yep.
Right, and they can be used to like sort of hint that this is going to happen, but it actually happens in a much, much worse way. But George R. R. Martin really is one of the champions of that.
Yeah.
And how he, like you're saying, how he throws something up in the air, and then you get to play with it however you want to, and it may or may not really have anything to do with the thing that happens. Your mind just naturally wants to draw conclusions, which I love.
Yeah,
and if there's also...
if it has an impact in the universe as well, before we get too far down this particular rabbit hole, White Guar in chat has pointed out that with George R. R. Martin's prophecies and that sort of thing, and you get characters almost predicting the foreshadowing as well. Because foreshadowing in universe has to be prophecy, I suppose, or has to be to a degree fortune telling and that sort of thing, because. The example that the White Wars pulled up is that Caitlin gets concerned about the direwolf, finding the dead direwolf with an antler stuck in its throat, which is pretty much kind of what happens. That the House of Baratheon really screws over the House of Stark. So
right,
but if you can kind of weave that into how the narrative works, and kind of it can set an awful lot of tone for the thing that you're making, because one of the things that has been a big thing about the Elder Scrolls, particularly the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, that the game starts off with a quote about prophecy. It's that each event is preceded by prophecy, but without the hero, there is no event.
Yeah.
Like they're two parts of the recipe.
Yeah. And it's basically you spend when you kind of get into the whole "you are the prophesied hero" thing, there's a big scandal about are you actually this thing? Are you just an imperial plant set up by the government? And that sort of thing. So are you the real deal?
There's a great book series that deals with this really well. The Farseer trilogy, which again I'm pretty sure I referenced last week. That there's the prophecies are just for people that are going to be either influencers or catalysts in the universe. And there's no prophecy as to whether or not that's good or bad. It just sort of sets up characters to be movers and shakers. Yeah. And then they get to do or are forced to do with that what they will, which is actually something I was going to speak about in terms of the under the shroud plotting. One of the nice ways that I've dealt with some of the foreshadowing is that there are a couple of characters in the mix who are manipulators of one variety or another, and George R. R. Martin also does this very well, where when you set something up to be potentially foreshadowed, or at least point to something and go, hey, that's important, pay attention to it, even though we're not going to deal with it so much now. When you have characters who are also sort of just paying attention to opportunities, and then they throw those opportunities into peril or confrontation or conflict, then that can become its own way to follow through on what you're setting up.
Yeah, no, that absolutely works, and you get interesting feedback loops then, and all sorts of things that you can get from.
That's a great way to phrase it. Feedback loops. I'm gonna put that in my thinker, because that's a nice. There's a lot of utility to thinking about that way.
Put it in your thinker. That's a good one.
Have a look at what how the Dune series considers prophecy, and that sort of thing.
Dune's a good one.
Because that considers some things about determinism and that sort of thing. It's not so much free will versus determinism, but the efforts of, well, if this thing has been prophesied and if it will happen, how much can we change it? Are we now locked into a future? What can we do to break it? How much wiggle room is there in the interpretation, and all this, that, and the other? Well, it's not so much interpretation in Dune as visions of the future, and how much the course can be deviated from that, and how bad is it all going to be. But it does a very similar thing.
My favorite example of just straight up predetermined destiny happening is probably the Scottish tragedy, which I'm terrified to say the name of it out loud. I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about.
The Scottish tragedy. We'll just call it that.
And the boil, toil, and trouble, or whatever the actual quote is. Yep. That's one that does, I think, a wonderful job of setting up exactly what's going to happen. Like every time one of those prophecies comes out, there's a little bit of like, hey, what exactly does that mean? But you're pretty sure you know what's going to happen from the get-go, and still leaves you just wondering enough as to how it's going to go down.
Yeah.
And how the moral failings come out, that I feel like that one works that whole angle pretty well.
Yeah, that's kind of one thing that I think modern storytelling doesn't really have a handle on is tragedy in itself, and kind of the inevitability of it all. We've got good at foreshadowing, but we've not got good at tragedy. It's not and kind of realizing the kind of the inevitability in the sense that brings about the downfall in quite as meaningful a way as it does in the Scottish play, if we're going to continue with that.
Mick tragedy. We'll call it Mick tragedy.
I like that. Yeah, it is a tricky thing with tragedy because from a seller's standpoint, it's not necessarily something that you really want to lean into too hard because folks frequently get upset. There's particularly in this day and age when there's this looming sense of a legitimate apocalypse, the idea that there's got to be some hope out there. As a matter of fact, I think that the one example of tragedy that I would point to would be Rogue One.
Ooh.
So specifically how?
That's
because they all die.
I wouldn't call that tragedy.
Okay.
That's
fair.
I would call that a not happy ending. Because there's because there's not an awful lot of foreshadowing in terms of how it's spelled out. It doesn't feel inevitable. It's kind of there's the kind of the line of, oh, you know this is a suicide mission, right? That you get fed. But then again, you always get fed that in those sorts of films. So there's not the sense of impending doom and kind of the weight of everything that you get in proper tragedy, in my view. So,
and I would the reason I would respectfully disagree with that is that is that because we are fed that so often, that's a symptom of not really dealing with tragedy as a concept. And what they did was actually follow through, which is so instead of taking it easy out. So yeah, I would say that does fall under the heading, but in a more honest way.
Yeah, I would draw a distinction between between the tragedy as in a tragic event and a dramatic tragedy, but that's me nitpicking. My excuse is I did a philosophy degree. I'm allowed to nitpick. But yeah, I can totally see where the differences come there. But it just depends on how you define tragedy, I guess, because it's taken on a different meaning from what it has from Greek plays and that sort of a sense.
Right. Well, and then the other problem with the term is that one of the definitions sort of draws a line between two different kinds of stories, which is one is comedy and one is tragedy.
Yeah.
The Greek tradition.
Right. And more than the Greek tradition, just the sense of stark duality, which gray area is much more everybody's cup of tea these days. So it makes it a little trickier to quite set on that one. So I recently wrote a story, and I'm not going to spoil too much for fans of the show, that has, and I'm going to talk about this as delicately as I can to not spoil any details. But I'm very curious, sort of the group here's impression about what this would qualify as tragedy. The main character of the show is an addict, and his continuing addiction I see to be as a tragic form. That frequently there are signs that say, hey, you probably should cut this out. And he solves whatever little problem there might be or finds his small moral victory, but then continues to hit the needle. And
like he never learns the lesson.
Well, he learns it. He's aware of it, as many addicts are, but he's not able to confront it, which is, I believe, nearly the definition of the tragic flaw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's if the flaw is the thing that drives certain failures. Now I said modern things don't do tragedy very well. Breaking Bad, I think, is a perfect example.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
He is constantly doing stupid things because of his ego.
He just keeps digging it deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, it's exactly that, and you know that's what's going to happen. You get this feeling you've got to kind of, oh no, kind of feeling, which
right?
Is what I associate with tragedy, so to speak.
Well, in the sense that it's what should happen, like the ending should be tragic or violent or what have you. Seems to be a lot of how that functions. Getting the audience to hope and to want, but also acknowledge the harsh realities.
Yeah, I really like when a story wraps up with the most likely thing actually happening. Like this is everything has been heading to this conclusion, And we've been trained by so much storytelling that like somehow the hero pulls it off and is able to make it out. You know, somehow Luke is able to blow up the entire Death Star, even though all the odds are against him. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
But when things actually just play out with, no, really, all the odds were stacked against you. This is the logical result of every decision that has been made so far. And it actually happened. And here it is. Like, that is so much more satisfying because you know it's going to happen. You just don't know how or when. And then it does. And you're like, oh, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
the trick being, I feel like the trick there is, it can be giving them a small victory, which is my bread and butter. Is the end can be bad as long as the protagonist resolved the conflict. That needs to happen. Like it can be a bad resolution, but the conflict needs to come to a close that feels like it's got a button on it. But also, I don't know. There's this desire to have some small victory before they, close out. Yeah, I think that oftentimes is important to an audience to feel like they've reached their end. Sacrifice for the greater good, or the bad guys survive, but maybe their work's a little harder, that sort of thing. I don't know. It can be very tricky.
Yeah, which is reminding me an awful lot of Tolkien's view of history. Now I think about it, his line is something like, seeing history as a slow defeat with small glimpses of the final victory. So if you think back to how Middle Earth works in terms of its narrative, the early days of the Silmarillion, where the elves are talking with the Valar, and it's all nice and shiny and optimistic, and then just gets steadily worse and worse as people's ambitions kind of grind down, and it gets further and further away from the ideal of the Valar. But you get these occasional hooray moments where Earendil brings back a Silmaril to the west, and Frodo manages to get the ring into the Mount Doom, and can actually win for a second, and before everything all goes wrong.
Yeah, but everything is constantly in decline. The elves are leaving. Yeah. Humans are worse than the elves morally.
And even their little Hobbiton haven gets scarred by the end of it. Which is, I think, one of the most important moments of the story. However drawn out it can feel, is this idea that the hobbits, which are obviously mostly representative of you and I and everybody else who's a normal person, when they have to come to grips with brutality and even their little corner gets tarnished, is I feel like is the natural conclusion of that.
Maybe, but I'd possibly also argue that that's the hero's journey made manifest, in that you can't go home anymore. It's you come back changed, so you're not going to be able to experience home as home anymore.
Well, but that's more plays into Frodo's development, where Frodo has to leave. Not so much, that I can't remember what the name is that Saruman takes on when he comes back and wrecks shit up. That wasn't necessary to Frodo realizing that he has to move on.
But was it for the others? Did it complete the hero journey for the other hobbits? Because Frodo is the most impacted by the ring, and he eventually has to leave Middle-earth in order to find any semblance of peace at all. But for the other hobbits, they all come back changed also, and their home is different when they get back, and that kind of wraps it up as well.
Possibly for Sam, particularly given the way the book ends.
Because
it literally, he kind of comes back, the Scouring of the Shire is all dealt with, he becomes a magistrate, he marries, he starts having kids.
He ends up like mayor of the Shire for like 4-6 terms or something like that.
Yeah, but and then the book ends on the quote of, well, I'm back.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, well, he's not back, but he is settled, he is at home again. That home is different, but it's home again. and it's the kind of the journey of he's gone from the Shire to the Shire, but Shire as home and Shire as place are different things. So the kind of the scouring of the Shire and the stuff that happens afterwards is kind of the process of almost the process of Sam making the Shire his home again.
That's a really good point. I do think just to bring up what the other two get into, because as I recall from the appendices, Pippin and Merry do not really settle. Like, they continue to move around, and there's not much in the way of violent adventure, the way the War of the Rings went down. But they don't really.
But they're unsettled.
As I recall,
yeah,
they don't ever really stay home. Like, they continue to move around and bump around. As a matter of fact, I don't recall if they even end up with significant others.
I think, don't they end up journeying back to Gondor?
Yeah, no, they're all, as I recall, they're all over the place.
Yeah, they don't really. You're right, they don't settle. I think I'm recalling this as you bring it up because it's been years since I've read through that stuff. But yeah,
right.
I think that might be right. I'm sure somebody else is yelling at their their radio right now, going, "No, you idiots! This is what they do, and then they do this, and then they do this." So. Man, this has been a really, really cool discussion. Every week we end up
spontaneous conversations.
Yeah, every week we go on these like trails and we get into all these other different topics. We're kind of running long, so I wanted to at least jump in on my topic a little bit before we wrap up the show with our little competition. So this is my official announcement that I am absolutely insane in starting another podcast. But
is it now?
Well, so let me justify this a little bit because it seems like I'm crazier than I actually am. The only podcasts that I actually do regular weekly releases for are the Fallout Lorecast and the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Those ones.
And this one.
Those two have their own patrons, and I have to keep up, the weekly stuff for the patrons. I gotta keep them happy because they're paying for it, right? Plus, those are kind of my meat and potatoes, and those are the things that I really enjoy the most. So I'm keeping up with those. I'm doing those every week. This podcast is hey, everybody gets together on Sundays in the middle of the day. We all chat, and it's actually a lot. It's heck, if we weren't recording it, then we'd probably be all hanging out talking at some point anyway. So we might as well record it and put it out there for people to listen to, right? Plus, it doesn't take as much in the way of me doing research and prep. We kind of get together and we all chat. So then there's the other shows that I've been doing, which are all kind of these like trials or one-off stabs at things. Sleepy Time Stories doesn't have to get released every week because it's just whenever I feel like reading stuff, and people can use the same episodes to fall asleep all the time. Robots Thoughts is just me riding in the car talking, so it either happens or it doesn't. It's just another one of those like, let's just try it out, see what happens. And then Myth is I'm going to get back to that at some point when I get enough time, but that takes a lot more work and prep and production and those kinds of things. So I really want to do it right, and I'd rather not rush it and squeeze it in between things. So here's the new show, and this is why I think I can actually do this. So I brought it up earlier. Cyberpunk 2077 is coming out in April, I believe, next year, and it's so in the, I use the bailiwick. Is that a good word? Wheelhouse. It's right in there with
great word.
Yeah. It's right in there with all these other things that all of us are talking about all the time. And I feel like there's a great opportunity. I haven't really found much in the way of other podcasts about it. Plus, there's so much about that world and the previous games and the stories about what happened in those games, and the new Cyberpunk Red and then Cyberpunk 2077 and what the world's like there, prepping for the new game coming out. So I think it's a great opportunity to kind of do the same thing I've been doing for the other shows and peel back the layers of, okay, what's going on in this world? How is it diverged from our reality? Who are these mega corporations? What are these different kinds of character classes? Who are the movers and shakers in the world? Kind of dig into each of those topics, while at the same time talking about the news and updates about things that we find out about the new game. And then when the game actually comes out, having conversations about playing the game and how that goes, and maybe even working some tabletop stuff in there from, there's a guy I work with at work, and Cyberpunk is his absolute, he plays lots of tabletop stuff. It is his absolute favorite genre or actual game to play. So, having people like that guest on the show and educate me more on their experiences of, running this system in those games. So there's a lot there, and I'm not going to necessarily commit to like a weekly release schedule, but I would like to regularly do episodes about the lore, individual episodes about news, and just kind of keep them nice and short, almost like a quick little news feed that is very clearly labeled as like, this is a lore episode, this is a news episode, this is a guest chatting about things, so that people really get a sense of what it is that they're going to be getting in that episode, and they can choose to listen or not, depending on how interested they are in that thing. So I
like that. Congratulations.
That's my new theory. Plus, and I'm super excited about this. I did the artwork. I got the logo set up. I did a little intro episode last night about, kind of stating all this stuff. So it should be up on feeds all over the place in the next week or two. But there's a band called The Midnight, who are one of those like synthwave, vaporwave, retrowave, whatever you want to call it, bands from LA. And I've been a fan of theirs for a few years now. And a few years back, they let me use some of their music in my Dungeons and Dragons show because it has that like 80s vibe, and it really fit. And I reached back out to them again. And I was like, hey, thanks for letting me use your music in this other show. You think I could use this on this other show also? And they were like, yeah, go for it. So I'm giving them props on every episode at the end in the show notes. So go check out The Midnight. Look them up online. You'll find them. Just type The Midnight Band. And the intro music and the outro music, and maybe even some of the other stuff I use during the episode, will be from their songs, which is so cool. It's got such a great vibe to it, and it's going to fit. And I'm just excited about putting all that together in this pretty little package. Nice. So, yeah, so that's what I'm excited about. And if you guys have any experience in the Cyberpunk world or the games and want to guest on a show and talk about some of the things about it, I'd love to have other people, because I don't know a ton about it. This is going to be a reason for me to nerd out and do research and learn more and get ready for the game to release, so I have a good background for building my own stories, kind of like Aramithius talked about, in that world. So have you guys played it much?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Okay. Well, man, maybe we should set up like a Discord night where we get people and we run a campaign over Discord.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll toss the idea around. We'll see who else chimes in. I don't know that I could run a campaign also, unless I justify it by like recording it and releasing it as another show.
Right.
Oh, geez. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have enough time to get it all done. So I have so many aspirations. I love starting things and getting things going. And then I wish I could like get them up and running and then hand them off to other people and start other new things.
Yeah, I've got an idea. I've got 2 ideas for narrative shows that I really want to put to work, but until I have either significantly more free time, the only way I can see them coming through is if I got a little team together that wanted to work on them. I have an idea. I have this sense that doing a slightly doing an erotic podcast would work really well.
So
take something. Did I talk about this?
No.
Previously?
How would you do this?
Well, I've got this idea for it set in the Shroud universe, doing something that that pitches to the BDSM community and the kink community, because they're an underrepresented group that is extraordinarily loyal to people who do deference to them. And I can see how it would be trouble to put a large budget behind what is essentially pornography with good writing in an ongoing series. Like I could see why that would be tricky to make for the screen. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't do an audio drama that is, again, somewhat pornographic and deals with the complexities of how the kink community works, because it's a very vibrant, very interesting community. I just think it'd be a great idea. All of that said, I would love to write that show, but I wouldn't have the time with all the stuff on my plate. But what I might be able to do is write it and then pass it off to somebody else who could direct and produce. Because to be totally frank, I've got a girlfriend who I'm very, very happy and very unbelievably lucky to be with, and I can't see her being happy with me directing that sort of thing. So I would love to set up this show and then work with ideally a director who lives in the kink community much more so than I do. I don't live there at all. To develop this kind of a show. I don't know. It's just an idea that I've got flopping around that would take a lot of work, and I don't have nearly the time.
All right, listeners, now's your opportunity. Reach out to Ian.
Yeah, seriously, hit me up. Do this.
If you have contacts or connections or can do this yourself.
Right?
Yeah, it's tough being all of us, all the different hosts. We're such creators. I mean, we like to make things. We have all these ideas all the time, but we only have so much time, so much energy, so much money. We're so limited in what we're able to actually produce and get out there. But there's this inherent need, and I'm sure you guys feel this too, to just like, you get a new idea and then all of a sudden you go, oh man, that would be great if I did this, and if I could do this, and I could do this, I could try this out. And you just want to at least give it a shot. You want to kind of put it out into the world and see if it takes on its own legs, you know?
And we're so spoiled by the podcast medium, which makes all of that so much more possible. Like if we were just dealing in screen work, these ideas would be just so much tougher to get together. I mean, you've got huge film set crews that you have to deal with, and budgeting and blah, blah, blah. Whereas, so like if I was sitting here and pitching a pornographic TV show, that is a whole world of difficulty putting together just logistically. But because we're used to working in the audio medium, where actually it's not that tough, it just takes enough time. It always seems like these new ideas are right at our fingertips, and yet so hard to actually reach.
Yeah. It's tricky. All right, anything else you guys wanted to add in before we move to our little competition at the end of the show?
I'm wildly curious how this competition is going to go, since as far as I can tell, we have Cyberpunk versus narrative versus foreshadowing.
Yeah, man. We'll have to figure that out. So let's recap the results from last week. Last week we ended up with where's my browser? Yep. So it was Chad versus Corn Black, and I think it's because more of our audience is familiar with Chad than Corn Black because it was your first week and they had just been introduced to your show. But yeah, 81% chose Chad over Corn Black. And I should have let it run for days. I forgot to switch the little thing on there, so I only ran one day. But 81% was pretty solid. I'm not sure that poor Corn would have come back, even given a few more days of voting. Poor Corn is used to
failure. This is where he lives. I'm sure if he were sitting right near with us, he would be in no way surprised, and in some regard pleased that the spotlight stayed off him.
Yeah, I think so. So here, why don't we do this? So we've got foreshadowing, we've got narrative, and we've got cyberpunk. Well, I can sit this one out because I'm the one who picks the stuff. So, man, I'm gonna scroll through here and narrative versus. I mean, we could do it two different ways. One, we could keep those, or two, we could take. You could pick a character from one of your recent shows. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Corin, but it could be like, go ahead and pick a character. Aramithius, you could pick like Vivek or somebody like that, somebody from a recent episode. And then we could...
You're talking about kink? Well...
Yeah. Ian's not gonna understand. Vivek is very interesting. We'll say that.
Yeah.
So you want to do that?
We'll get to that with the arguments.
Okay, so so go ahead and tell me who your character is, because I'd rather I want it to be kind of random. I want you to just pick a character, and then I'll give you
let's run with Vivek, just to simply see how awkward we can make everyone.
Okay, all right, you got Vivek.
Or confused.
Got it.
If we're going with awkward, then I'm gonna pick the doctor. Who is a necrophiliac meth head who's trying to he's my Dr. Frankenstein allegory, who's trying to figure out how to craft a soul from whole cloth. And yeah, he's weird.
Yeah, he's weird. All right. Well, here's the one I found. I did this like random search for, honorifics. And this week is, who is the most likely to murder someone for a pizza?
So
that's what we got.
Okay.
No, I don't know that pizza exists in the Elder Scrolls world, but we'll pretend. We can pretend that it's like a round, plate of some sort of bread with some.
Who doesn't have
toppings?
Pie? Everybody's got a pie in one form or another.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right,
Okay,
so
we're arguing for why
your character would be most likely to win that
Okay.
honorific.
Okay.
Okay. Whoever's ready can go.
Right now, I can tell you right now that the doctor doesn't really need a reason to kill people. At this juncture, he's literally collecting as many recently dead bodies as he can find. And I can guarantee you that neither him nor Iggy is a great cook. As a matter of fact, as I recall, when I was doing some backstory on those characters, they mostly rely on the largely brain dead reanimated for all of their household tasks. And that means there's been a lot of ramen. So I guarantee you there's pizza boxes coming in and out of that house. And if they, if a pizza came up and they were mid-experiment and needed someone to fill out the brain role, they would absolutely cut somebody down.
Yeah, some lowly pizza delivery.
Yeah. I could also see them going, oh, okay, cool. So that worked really well. Every Friday night, it'll be pizza night. And then we'll feed the pizza in part to the guy that we just resurrected who brought the pie last week. It'll be great. It'll be a whole big thing.
Yeah.
The one argument against them
is that a feedback
that they
loop?
are meth heads. Yeah, right?
Unlikely to succeed. Okay.
The one problem I see is that they're meth addicts and they're not going to actually eat all that much. This is the one problem with my argument, just to call myself out.
Yeah.
So what's the doctor's name?
I've been leaning with just the doctor, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to stick with that. Just because, there's no bones made about the Dr. Frankenstein allegory at all, and the character of Igor is Iggy, but in the scripts he's written as Igor. That said, I didn't want to give him another name, and I didn't want to come out and use that name itself. And there's a reason for that that I'm going to keep under my whatever
kimono
sleeve.
Under your kimono.
Under my kimono.
There you go.
Keep under the doctor's kimono. But I can't let that one out because that little piece of information won't come out for current plotting puts it about 5 years out.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Cool.
It'll
okay.
be a pretty obvious joke when it comes out, but it's going to be a while. Anyway.
All right, Aramithius.
Okay. Vivek is most likely to kill someone for a pizza because pizza in the Elder Scrolls would be such an unlikely occurrence. It would be of metaphysical significance. Therefore, it would have to be cut in 8 slices. It would have to be a proper representation of the tower and the wheel. And as usual with pizza, the center will not hold. So so it will have to be put in the precisely right way. So Z is not going to let anyone else near the thing, and will probably guard it to within an inch of her life, because it's got to be prepared in the right way. It's got to have its right place. It has got to be the most pizza-ish pizza it can be, because it's the only pizza there, and they just need to be everything to be absolutely perfect.
Oh my God. Everybody who just listened to your most recent episode is going to be like clapping and cheering right now, because that is the perfect answer for Vivek. Wow.
I do my crippled best.
Awesome. Okay, so those are both very good answers. Listen to both of their shows and get a sense of why each of those makes more sense. Because people who have not listened to either of the shows are going to be like, wait, what? About both of them. So go listen to the shows, listen to this episode. You're already here listening to the episode, so that doesn't make any sense. And vote on Twitter who you think is going to be the most likely to murder someone for a pizza. And thank you guys for joining me this week. This has been a lot of fun. And we keep delving deeper into these topics. Maybe we should just call this like Robots Deep Topic Cast. That's a terrible name.
I don't know. I really like the round table thing because there's the Arthurian reference there. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'd imagine. That's the kind of stuff I would imagine they talk about. As long as they keep Kay out of the picture and he's not just pissing people off, I would think a lot of philosophy would come to light.
Mm-hmm.
There's part of me that thinks we might actually need to specify topics beforehand so we can actually look up all the obscure references we keep on making.
Maybe.
I was thinking about that myself. because there was a couple of topics that I sort of set aside because I was like, I don't know if I really go down this rabbit hole, but I'm going to start posting them a little bit ahead of time so we can all be prepped.
Cool.
Sure. Yeah, that works. Cool. Yeah. So when we're chatting about who's going to make it for the week, I'm going to make it. Here's my topic.
Right.
Sounds good.
Cool. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. And to close it up, where can everybody get a hold of you and your shows and your message you stuff and your web presence and all that kind of fun things? Aramithius?
Yeah, I am on Twitter at Aramithius. The Written Uncertainty podcast is available pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. I vaguely hang out on the Test Law subreddit every so often. There is a Written Uncertainty Discord server as well. The Written in Uncertainty website is writteninuncertainty.com, and all the details of everything is there. And a specific point at this point, I've been talking about Real White Gua in the chat. He runs the Telmora Independent Press, and I occasionally write some things for that. I am working on something at the moment for that I need your help with, people. I have basically been tasked with writing a brief history, probably not so brief, of the Elder Scrolls fandom. And so I would love people's opinions on how they think it's changed, how they see it as a whole. If you have anything to do with that, can you please hit me up on any of those channels, or at writteninuncertaintypodcast@gmail.com. I will be in touch with questions and anything else that about the whole project, and will hopefully wind its way into an article in the Telmora Independent Press.
Cool. That's a cool project.
That's everywhere.
Awesome. All right, cool. Ian?
First off, I want to give a shout out to Robots Radio follower Chris, who recently followed us on Patreon, or signed up for our Patreon account for Under the Shroud. That meant a whole lot to me, and your comments continue to be very inspiring. Thank you. To everyone else, if you'd like to sign up for our Patreon account, we are an explicit account, so you're going to have to look for it directly. You can't just search it. You have to type in the URL, which is patreon.com/undertheshroud. You can also find us on Instagram. Our handle is Under the Shroud, or if you search for us, I'm sure you'll find it quickly. My Twitter is @FictionalIan, all one word. And right now I've been pushing the hashtag #ExtraNaturalHistory, which is where I take various historical events, historical characters, and frame them in the Shroud universe. Usually aimed towards comedy, though oftentimes with just fun little notes about how the universe functions. Thank you guys so much. We're going to be putting out our next issue of the Weekly World Coastal, which is an in-universe newspaper that I had slacked off on, but thanks to Chris's encouragement, I'm going to be pumping those out again starting this week.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, it's a fun little paper. I'm definitely going to send one to everybody who's in the Robots Radio Network, so you have a sense as to what the Shroud universe is building towards.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. I mean, all these fun things we're all a part of. It's so great. And I want to reiterate the thank you to anybody who subscribes on any of our Patreons. I know the three of us and a lot of the other shows have our own Patreons. So if you are subbing, I guess that's the word, patronizing. That always sounds weird to me. If you are a patron of any of the shows, we really do appreciate it. And if you do enjoy the Robots Roundtable, there isn't a Patreon for this, but go look up the hosts that you enjoy, go check out their other stuff, and help them out there, because everybody on this network I know really loves doing what they're doing, and they put their heart and their souls into this work, and even an extra $1 a month would be huge. It really just shows us that you guys appreciate it, and it does help us keep going. So thank you so much for all of that. I'm your host, Robots, or Tom, and I also host shows like the Fallout Lorecast and the Elder Scrolls Lorecast and a bunch of other stuff, and go to robotsradio.net to check all that stuff out. The poll will be up on the official Robots Radio Twitter account @robots_radio on Twitter. So go on there and vote for who you would like to win our pizza contest this week. And until next week, thank you guys for hanging out. This has been a lot of fun. I guess I'll chat with you. Hopefully you'll both be able to make it next week. And if not, I'm sure I'll see you on the Discord. So, All right, everybody, have a great week. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
And cut.
Cool.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thank you, guys. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what I really like about doing these is that it really gives us all an opportunity to get to know each other better. But so many times we all have like similar references to stories and things that we like that we would never have known of if we didn't chat about it on here.
Oh, I was so pleased with how much we all knew about Lord of the Rings. And like, it wasn't encyclopedic knowledge, but I was glad that we were able to take that train for a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, we're still doing post.
We're still streaming. Yeah, this is like the post chat for people who want to hang out. Yeah. Yeah, we'll be getting off pretty soon. But yeah, I always think that's cool. It's like a lot of these things come up and we're like, hey, we got these in common. That's really neat. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out. And thank you to our viewers on Twitch and YouTube and wherever else. And same time next week if you want to hop in and check this out live. Otherwise, the episode should be up tomorrow at the latest. And you can listen to the whole episode on whatever podcast platform you use. So, all right, guys. Well, have a good rest of your weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Bye. All right, see ya.
Bye.